Well, as you know, this coming week will mark a year since Ramaphosa took over as the country's president. He delivered his second State of the Nation address on Thursday, or Sona as you might prefer the acronym. He made a wide range of promises from the economy to jobs to the youth. Now, let's look back on that address from the other evening and 12 months in office. It's a huge pleasure to welcome two professors. I'm slightly intimidated. Suzanne Boyson from the Bapangubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, and a regular guest as well, Professor Patrick Bond from Wits University. I feel like I'm at university and I failed a test, and I'm about to be yelled at by the both of you. Professors, good evening to both of you.
Good evening.
I think perhaps I can start with this, Professor Boyson. The most important comment from the entire evening is that Ramaphosa wants to start a band with Julius Malema. That was probably the standout comment for me. Apart from lifting the atmosphere, almost many were saying disarmed the EFF.
Yes, he plays Julius Malema exactly, and he did it exactly the way he did last year. And of course, apart from probably diffusing that potential for questioning about the Bosasa baggage that Ramaphosa comes with, it is very interesting, that play there, because should Ramaphosa not succeed in his quest to save the ANC electorally, and so much of the so-called inspirational part of the speech was about trying to re-infuse Ramaphosa, which will rescue the ANC in an election. But if the ANC and Ramaphosa do not manage that, then of course there would be the question of coalition partners, and then a question arises: would Julius Malema be a coalition partner? And if Ramaphosa can play Malema like that at a big event like that, it will probably not be the story of the metro municipalities if it comes to that politically.
Professor Bond, from the economic side of things, is Julius Malema now the lead and front singer for Ramaphosa as far as the economy is concerned, knowing what Malema is fighting for and the mandate that the president has to get this country's economy back on track? Is Malema now the front man for the economy, for the ANC?
That's a contradiction, and so you can do political theatre and maybe draw in Malema with a smile. And they didn't do a protest as had been anticipated. But don't forget that this entire week was filled with protests by EFF's constituents in the student movement. They were really, certainly at Wits, leading the group that had demobilized our university for a few days. And one of their own leaders was shot dead in Durban at DUT. And then there's the protests even in Sandton and Alexandra specifically that show the community anger is still very intense. And then the unions, and you just had the COSATU leader, the President Losi, saying that if Eskom isn't handled properly, like NUMSA did last year, when they came with a 0% wage increase offer, they could shut the electricity down. So these constituents on the ground, labor, students, youth, community, I don't know if Ramaphosa has an answer for them.
What do you make of this unbundling of Eskom? Because that seems to have been the biggest talking point, if you could just talk as far as the economy is concerned, because Eskom is sucking the economy, isn't it?
It is the classic, what we would call a public management strategy of neoliberal fragmentation of an institution. It's very hard to do that well. When we fragmented this city, Johannesburg, in Igoli 2002, about 20 years ago it was nearly, it fragmented too much. I mean, water was distinct from health. So if you fragment away from your production, your transmission, and your generation, and your distribution, you may actually have a series of, let's say, disarticulations. The real question is whether the prices are going to be changing, whether the workers are going to be fired en masse. And you know what Cyril Ramaphosa said, his one little comment about climate change, aside from being fearful about it, was we need a just transition as we get out of coal eventually. I think that's one of the big dilemmas. We still have a very coal-addicted economy, and although Ramaphosa promised a just transition, meaning the workers won't be fired, they'll be retrained for solar, for wind, that remains to be seen.
Professor Boyson, what do you make? That's the economy side of it, the cost of Eskom and our power. But the president, as the president and the head of state and the president of the ANC, has a very tight line he has to walk with the tripartite alliance. We've heard from COSATU, we've heard from SAFTU. Every union you speak to on this channel is vehemently against this unbundling. How does he play this politically?
Yes. And unbundling unions really link it to potential job losses. I think if unions can be assured that the job losses will be non-existent, that they can retain that. Cannot at this stage, no. But the Eskom issue so epitomizes the rest of the problem of the South African state at this moment, and that is decline and, in many cases actually, quite collapse of crucial state institutions. And Eskom is one of them as well as a state-owned enterprise. And so much of Ramaphosa's speech was about giving signals as to how the state institutions can be restored, while Ramaphosa carries that very heavy dual burden of having to keep the ANC intact, that kind of unity there, and yet make sure he shows South Africa, don't even speak about the electorate at this stage, but South Africa, that yes, this state can still be turned around, that the ANC, who has been in command of the state, the bulk of the state, for so long now, that they actually can pull things together and can restore a credible state which voters, citizens can trust in South Africa. And Eskom is so corrupt, so dysfunctional, and we have seen the argument that unbundling it into three different functional units, that creates a better chance of fundraising, of keeping track of money. So that is, I don't know whether that's the ultimate answer, but that is a big part of trying to turn the South African state around.
As far as turning the South African state around, Professor Bond, I need to be clear on this. Professor Bond, it always hinges on the economy. Underpinning the economy, of course, is the creation of jobs. And we've been talking about this every time there's a State of the Nation, every time there's a budget speech, jobs comes out. I seem to get the sense we're not getting any closer to a target. The goalposts keep moving, and even when the goalposts are moved, we keep missing that target.
Oh, it's true, and 275,000 a year. That's well below even what, if you remember 22 years ago, GEAR, Growth Employment Redistribution, they wanted 400,000 a year after the year 2000. So it's more limited horizons. And that's because I think we're just still stuck, partly because we're reliant on a world economy that's very shaky and that hasn't been demanding our main exports, coal, iron ore, gold, platinum, the main minerals. We'd hoped that with the Chinese moving up to a Belt and Road initiative, that could bring a very labor-intensive mining sector back. But we could even get a sense from the mining Indaba last week in Cape Town, not much enthusiasm, not much expectation. And with the Chinese, they just registered an 8% year-on-year decline in imports. They may have major debt problems. The U.S. may have run out of steam. So I wouldn't count on the world economy providing the impetus for jobs. And I'm afraid Cyril Ramaphosa is doing so. He certainly says buy local, but he's also export. But the markets may not be there.
And do you think he's getting the messaging across? Let's talk about the electorate for the moment. Those ANC supporters that we've interviewed and spoken to on the streets ahead of these elections, they keep asking for jobs for them, their parents, their children.
Yes.
Is this knocking your head against a brick wall?
It is in many ways. We do see in the Sona address little bits. We do not know whether it can possibly even be nearly enough, but little bits, initiatives, investment, and Cyril Ramaphosa is doing the gradual big investment and then economic growth and then jobs in that way kind of approach, plus emphasizing, and perhaps that can bring a little bit of hope, small community initiative, rural area initiatives to get development, to get small enterprises funded and supported and encouraged and training done. And so that is the only kind of hope that this Sona really has and which can be taken forward into an election campaign for the ANC. And they would have to fill in a huge amount to make people sustain hope. Yeah.
Professor Bond, just how damaging has state capture been? Remembering, of course, that we're now hearing about all these large organizations, money being plowed into this. The money is missing. It's being paid off under the table. How damaging is this state capture and his ongoing inquiries? How does it make us look? And B, how does the president handle that?
Oh, it's profound. It's interesting because 2 weeks ago, Transparency International actually rated South Africa worse in 2018 than it was in 2017. After a year of Cyril Ramaphosa's presidency, there's not a sense yet of cleaning it out. I should add, though, we come in at around the middle, about 73rd least corrupt. That's for our public officials, so our politicians, our state bureaucrats. If you look at our corporates, they come in most corrupt in the PricewaterhouseCoopers Economic Crime Survey. To me, that's terribly important because it really suggests that as the ANC came into power, there was a culture of corruption. You could say apartheid in business was a corrupt relationship, a crime against humanity. It really continued and amplified as we liberalized, as it became easier to take money offshore. Even our President Ramaphosa involved in MTN, Shanduka and Lonmin, you can see the Paradise Papers, moving money offshore. It's called base erosion profit shifting. It's called misinvoicing or transfer pricing, but it's basically illicit financial flows. And if at the very top of the government we haven't found ways to punish the corporates, and we have to rely on the United States, for example, last week to punish Standard Chartered Bank for manipulating the rand, and we need a competition commission to do it, not our Reserve Bank and Finance Ministry. We need to step up that game.
Professor Boyson, I see you nodding as Professor Bond is speaking. Just your response to that, and I just want to turn our attention to 12 months in office, but I saw you nodding.
Yes, indeed. You know, as the Zondo Commission functions, we also become more aware of the depth and the breadth of these problems, and knowing how wide capture really goes, and how it wasn't just the Zuma side, although overwhelmingly the Zuma side of the ANC, but the other side of the ANC also that come out and they also take a tumble and they get mentioned. And I think that is largely responsible for the change in impressions on corruption.
Professor Bond, I'm going to leave this as a last question to you. If you were giving the executive summary to President Ramaphosa, he's sitting in front of you right now. His last 12 months, he's saying to Professor Bond, how have I done?
Because of the reliance on investment summits, on a stimulation package, a job summit that was, you know, a little bit fluffy, we didn't really see much more than a trickle-down philosophy, which is you give more to the corporates. Even in the speech, he said, we'll try and fix your tariffs on electricity and transport. What I'd like to have seen was what he said last year. He'd promised a social summit. He'd promised communities and NGOs and civil society that they would be given attention. He didn't do that. I would disagree with you both. I think it is reasonable to ask a government to produce jobs en masse while dealing with the environment. The U.S., by the way, they're calling it a Green New Deal, and it's the subject of a lot of debate. Here, there's a movement called Million Climate Jobs out of a Cape Town institute. They use the phrase just transition, but the question is it real or is it rhetoric? Are they talking left but walking in the same old way, which relies on carbon-intensive pollution, total offshore oil finds? And we do have such a great need to clean up this place, and the worst challenge we're going to face in coming decades is climate. I would have said that would have been not just a token throwaway remark, but it should have been the core.
Big focus as well. Professor Boyson, if you had the president sitting in front of you now, he goes, well, how was my last year in office? You are telling him what?
You tried so hard and you had some successes. Given where we've come from, given that marginal turn away from 179 victory at Nasrec 2017 to where we are now, we've come a long way. And Cyril Ramaphosa has had flaws and all, and big criticisms and all. He's had a huge role to play in that, to the extent that so much of the ANC's fortune and South Africa's good impressions currently hinge around this one person. So I actually think he has done very well with huge gaps remaining.
I appreciate both of you coming in to speak to us. There's so much in Sona, and I'm sure we're going to unpack that and focus on those key points, Professor Bond, that you were talking about as well. We'll unpack Sona as we head up to budget speech as well. My thanks to both of you for this evening, Professor Susan Boyson from the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection and Professor Patrick Bond from Wits University. We heard